Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Pathfinder and watched the stars bend around his ship. The quantum fold drive hummed beneath his feet like a living thing. After 300 years of dreaming about traveling to other stars, humans had finally done it. Jake felt proud to be the first captain to take his crew beyond the solar system. Lisa Brooks worked at her station near the back of the bridge. She was the best engineer Jake had ever known. Her hands moved quickly over the control panels as she watched the ship's systems. The fold drive was new technology and still had problems sometimes. Lisa made sure everything worked perfectly during their first trip to another star. Ryan Carter sat at the navigation station. He had been planning this trip for 2 years. Every calculation had to be perfect, or they might end up lost in space forever. Ryan checked their position one more time as they approached Proxima Centauri. The red star grew larger on the main screen. Amanda White listened to her communications equipment with a frown on her face. She expected to hear radio signals from the star system. Every computer model said they should find something interesting here, but her equipment only picked up strange sounds that made no sense. The sounds reminded her of whispers in an empty room. Jake looked at the main screen as their ship dropped out of fold space. Proxima Centauri burned red in front of them. 3 planets orbited the star. The closest planet looked like Earth might have looked billions of years ago. The second planet was covered in ice, but the third planet made everyone on the bridge stop talking. The third planet was dead. Its surface was covered in crystal structures that reflected the red starlight in rainbow colors. The crystals formed perfect geometric shapes that hurt to look at for too long. Huge crystal towers reached up from the planet's surface into space. Some of the towers were broken and floating in pieces around the planet. Dr. Helen Parker came to the bridge carrying her analysis equipment. She studied dead civilizations for a living. Helen had hoped to find ruins of ancient aliens on this trip, but she had never expected to find anything like this. The crystal structures were clearly made by intelligent beings, but they looked nothing like anything humans had ever built. Jake ordered the ship to move closer to the dead planet. As they approached, their sensors picked up more details. The crystal structures covered the entire planet. Cities made of crystal stretched from pole to pole, but there were no signs of life anywhere. The planet was completely silent. Lisa ran a scan on the crystal towers floating in space. Her equipment showed that the crystals were not natural. They contained complex patterns of information stored in their molecular structure. It was like finding a computer made of living rock, but the computer was damaged and most of its data was corrupted. Amanda picked up stronger signals as they got closer to the planet. The whispers became clearer. She could almost make out words, but they were in no language she had ever heard. The sound seemed to come from the crystal structures themselves. She recorded everything and tried to find patterns in the signals. Ryan guided the ship into orbit around the crystal planet. As they circled the dead world, they found more evidence of what had happened here. Massive scars marked the planet's surface where something had torn through the crystal cities. Whatever had built this place had fought a terrible war, and they had lost. Dr. Parker asked Jake to take the ship to one of the floating crystal towers. She wanted to bring a piece aboard for study. Jake agreed, but he felt nervous about touching anything from the dead planet. The crystals looked beautiful, but something about them made his skin crawl. The crew brought a small crystal fragment into the ship's laboratory. Dr. Parker connected it to her computers and tried to decode the information stored inside. What she found made her call Jake to the lab immediately. The crystal contained the final messages of the beings who had built this place. The messages were fragmented and hard to understand. But Dr. Parker slowly pieced together the story. The builders called themselves the Zephyrians. They had built an empire that stretched across thousands of star systems. For millions of years, they had ruled a large part of the galaxy. Then something came for them. The Zephyrians' final messages spoke of harvesters and cleansing. They described massive ships that came from the dark spaces between stars. The ships had converted entire planets into something else. The messages ended with desperate calls for help that no one had answered. Jake felt cold as he read the translated messages. If something had destroyed a civilization that ruled thousands of star systems, what chance did humanity have? He was still thinking about this when Amanda called from the bridge. She had found something alive. Deep inside one of the crystal towers, Amanda's sensors detected a faint energy signature. Something was still working in the dead ruins. Jake ordered a team to investigate. Dr. Parker volunteered to go with them even though Jake thought it was too dangerous. The team found a chamber deep inside the crystal tower. Ancient machines still hummed with power after who knows how many years. In the center of the chamber was a stasis pod made of the same crystal material as everything else. Inside the pod was a being unlike anything humans had ever seen. The alien was tall and thin with skin that looked like it was made of starlight. Its eyes were closed, but Dr. Parker's scanners showed that it was still alive. The stasis system was failing, though. The alien would die soon if they did not do something. Jake made a decision that would change everything. He ordered the team to bring the alien aboard their ship. Dr. Parker worked for hours to connect the alien stasis pod to the ship's power systems. Just as the pod's original power failed completely, the alien's eyes opened. The being spoke without moving its mouth. Its voice appeared inside everyone's head at the same time. It said its name was Kethvar, and that it had been waiting for someone to find it. Kethvar had been the last guardian of this dead world. It had stayed behind to warn whoever came next. Through painful telepathic contact that made everyone's head hurt, Kethvar told them the truth. A collective consciousness called the Dominion swept through the galaxy every few thousand years. They enslaved or destroyed any species that became advanced enough to travel between stars. The Dominion had sensors that watched for the energy signatures of faster-than-light travel. Humanity's first trip to another star had triggered those ancient sensors. The Dominion was coming to Earth. Kethvar showed them images of harvest ships the size of cities. It showed them planets where entire civilizations had been converted into something that served the Dominion's will. Jake stared at the alien's memories and felt his heart stop. Long-range sensors were already detecting massive ships approaching Earth's solar system. The ships were still months away, but they were definitely heading for humanity's homeworld. Jake faced an impossible choice. He could send a warning to Earth, but that might make the Dominion move faster, or he could stay silent and watch his homeworld die unprepared. Either way, humanity was about to face the same fate as the Zephyrians and countless other species. The stars that had seemed so full of promise now looked cold and hostile. Somewhere in the dark between them, ancient enemies were already moving toward Earth. 6 months after Captain Jake Morrison's desperate warning reached Earth, the Dominion arrived in force that made humanity's worst nightmares look small. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched her defense fleet get torn apart by weapons that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. The enemy ships were not machines. In any way humans understood, they were alive. Each harvester ship was the size of a city, and pulsed with veins of light that ran across their organic hulls. Neural networks covered their surfaces like glowing spider webs. The ships moved through space like massive sea creatures swimming through an invisible ocean. Kate had commanded Earth Space Forces for 15 years. She had trained for wars against other humans, pirates, and even theoretical alien invasions. But nothing had prepared her for enemies that treated space battles like a farmer treats harvesting crops. The Dominion ships did not try to destroy humanity's fleet. They simply absorbed it. Every human ship that got too close to a harvester disappeared inside growing sections of alien hull. Kate watched in horror as the UES Victory was pulled inside a harvester like food being swallowed by a giant mouth. The ship's final transmission showed the crew being connected to cables that grew from the walls. Within minutes, those same crew members appeared on the harvester's surface, working to capture more human ships. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Hayes crouched in the ruins of what used to be Times Square and tried not to think about how quickly everything had fallen apart. New York City had been one of the first targets. The harvester ship had settled over Manhattan like a storm cloud that never moved. Within hours, the city's 8 million people had become something else. The creatures that had been human still looked mostly human, but their eyes glowed with the same light that pulsed through the harvester ships. They moved with perfect coordination, like dancers who had practiced the same routine a million times. When they spoke, their voices carried harmonics that hurt to hear. Tony Riggs set another explosive charge against the base of a conversion tower. The Dominion had built these structures all over the city. They looked like metal trees that grew cables instead of leaves. The cables connected to every building and every person they could reach. Tony's job was to blow up as many towers as possible before the enemy found their hiding place. Dr. Grace Mitchell worked on a wounded resistance fighter in an abandoned subway station. The man had been partially converted before his team rescued him. Cables still grew from his neck and arms. Grace had learned to cut the cables and treat the wounds, but she could not fix what the conversion process did to people's minds. The man kept asking when he could go back to work for the collective. Carmen Rodriguez hotwired another abandoned car in the street above their hideout. She had been a street racer before the invasion. Now she used her driving skills to move resistance teams around the city without being caught. Carmen had memorized every tunnel, alley, and rooftop route that the harvester ships could not monitor. The resistance had learned that the Dominion's greatest strength was also a weakness. The collective consciousness that connected all the converted humans worked perfectly when everything went according to plan. But when Sam's team caused chaos and confusion, the collective had trouble adapting quickly enough. 3,000 miles away, in a secret military facility buried deep under the Colorado mountains, Dr. Ben Crawford worked with equipment that would have been science fiction just a year ago. His team had been reverse engineering captured Dominion technology since the first harvester ship crashed in the Pacific Ocean. Dr. Maya Singh calibrated a quantum scanner, while Alex Turner wrote code that could interface with alien neural networks. They had discovered that the Dominion's collective consciousness was not magic. It was an incredibly advanced form of networked computing that used living brains as processors. Ben had been studying the collective for months. Every converted human was connected to every other converted human through quantum entanglement. Information flowed between them faster than light could travel. The network was so efficient that individual thoughts became group thoughts almost instantly. But Ben had found something interesting in the captured data. The collective consciousness was not natural. It had been created by combining the minds of thousands of different alien species. Each species had contributed its own way of thinking to the network. The result was incredibly powerful, but also incredibly complex. The breakthrough came when Ben realized that complexity was the key. The collective worked because every mind in it had been trained to think in harmony with every other mind. But what would happen if someone introduced a mind that refused to be harmonized? A mind that insisted on thinking its own thoughts no matter what the collective wanted. Alex finished writing the virus program while Maya prepared the neural interface equipment. The plan was simple in theory but terrifying in practice. They would connect a human volunteer to the Dominion network and use that person's mind to carry a virus into the collective's core systems. The virus would not destroy the network, but it would disrupt the harmony that held it together. The problem was that the volunteer would have to maintain their individual consciousness while connected to billions of other minds. Every other species that had tried to resist the collective had failed at this step. Their minds had been absorbed into the network within seconds. But Ben thought humans might be different. Humans had evolved to be stubborn and independent. Where other species valued harmony and cooperation above all else, humans had built their entire civilization on the idea that different people could disagree and still work together. Admiral Sullivan's fleet made its last stand near the moon. Only 12 human ships remained out of the 300 that had started the battle. Kate knew they could not win, but they could buy time for the people still fighting on Earth's surface. The UES Defiance launched everything it had at the largest harvester ship. Nuclear missiles, plasma cannons, and kinetic projectiles all struck the alien vessel at the same time. For a moment, Kate allowed herself to hope. Then the harvester ship healed its wounds like a living creature recovering from an injury. The counterattack came in the form of neural disruptors that passed right through the Defiance's shields. Kate watched her crew collapse at their stations as the alien weapon attacked their nervous systems directly. She felt the weapon starting to affect her own mind when the ship's emergency systems activated and broke the connection. On Earth's surface, Sam's resistance cell prepared for their most dangerous mission yet. Intelligence reports said the Dominion was building a master control node in the ruins of Washington, D.C. If they could destroy it, they might disrupt the collective's coordination over the entire East Coast. The team moved through the city's abandoned metro tunnels. Grace carried medical supplies for the inevitable casualties. Tony had enough explosives to level a city block. Carmen had mapped 3 different escape routes in case their primary plan failed. They found the control node in what used to be the Capitol building. The Dominion had converted the entire structure into a massive neural processing center. Cables thick as tree trunks ran through every hallway. The walls pulsed with the same light that marked all Dominion technology, but they were not the only humans in the building. Hundreds of converted people worked throughout the structure. maintaining the systems and processing information for the collective. Some of them had been members of Congress. Others had been tourists who were in the wrong place when the harvesters arrived. Sam recognized Senator Patricia Williams working at a control panel. She had been his daughter's hero before the invasion. Now she turned toward his team with glowing eyes and called for security in a voice that belonged to the collective. The firefight that followed was unlike any battle Sam had ever experienced. The converted humans moved with perfect coordination. They knew exactly where each resistance fighter was at all times because they shared the same awareness. But they also moved predictably because they all shared the same tactical thinking. Tony's explosives brought down half the control node before the enemy could stop him. But the victory came at a terrible price. Grace was captured during the escape and Carmen was badly wounded. Sam carried his friend to safety while converted humans pursued them through the tunnels. Back in Colorado, Ben's team prepared for their own desperate gamble. They had found a volunteer for the neural interface mission. Captain Lucy Barnes had been a test pilot before the war. She understood dangerous missions and was not afraid to risk her life for a chance to hurt the enemy. Maya connected the neural interface cables to Lucy's skull, while Alex loaded the virus program into the system. Ben monitored Lucy's vital signs as they prepared to connect her consciousness to the Dominion network. The moment the connection activated, Lucy's eyes rolled back in her head and her body went rigid. On the monitoring equipment, her brain activity spiked to levels that should have been impossible. She was experiencing the thoughts of billions of minds at the same time. For 30 seconds, everyone thought the experiment had failed. Lucy's vital signs fluctuated wildly as her brain tried to process information from across the galaxy. Then her eyes opened and she spoke in a voice that somehow contained harmonics like the converted humans. 2 years into the occupation, Commander Steve Walsh operated from a network of underground bunkers that stretched across 3 continents. The Resistance had learned to live like moles, staying deep enough underground that the Dominion sensors could not find them. Steve coordinated resistance cells from a command center built inside an abandoned subway system beneath what used to be London. The war had changed everyone who survived it. Steve had been a logistics officer before the invasion. Now he planned operations that would have been considered terrorism in the old world. But the old world was gone, and desperate times called for desperate measures. Nick Thompson checked his equipment before heading out on another sabotage mission. He had been a Navy SEAL before the war, but fighting the Dominion required skills they had never taught him in training. Traditional military tactics did not work against an enemy that could read the minds of anyone they captured. The Resistance had learned to compartmentalize information. No single person knew enough to compromise the entire network if they were taken. Nick knew his target and his mission, but nothing else. He would destroy a conversion facility in Manchester and then disappear back into the tunnels before the enemy could respond. Zoe Kim worked at a bank of computers she had built from salvaged parts. Before the invasion, she had been a hacker who broke into corporate networks for fun. Now she used her skills to reprogram captured Dominion technology. The alien systems were incredibly advanced, but they had not been designed to resist someone who thought like a human criminal. Dr. Frank Miller studied a neural interface module they had pulled from a destroyed harvester ship. Frank had been a computer scientist who specialized in artificial intelligence. The Dominion's technology was like nothing he had ever seen, but it followed principles he could understand. The aliens had essentially turned every converted human into a biological computer processor. The Resistance had evolved far beyond simple guerrilla warfare. They used the Dominion's own technology against them, salvaging neural interfaces and reprogramming them to disrupt the collective's control signals. Small victories accumulated like drops of water that eventually became a flood. Last month, a team in Australia had caused a harvester ship to crash into the Pacific Ocean. The week before that, Resistance fighters in Europe had destroyed a major conversion facility and freed 3,000 humans from Dominion control. But these victories came at a terrible price. The freed humans often suffered from severe psychological trauma. Their minds had been connected to the collective consciousness for months or years. When the connection was severed, many of them could not cope with being alone in their own thoughts again. Some begged to be reconnected to the collective, rather than deal with the isolation of individual consciousness. Dr. Frank worked with the freed humans and tried to help them recover their individual identities. But it was like trying to teach someone how to walk again After years of being carried everywhere they went, the collective had made all their decisions for them. Now they had to remember how to think for themselves. Meanwhile, Dr. Ben Crawford's underground research had produced remarkable results. Project Mindbridge allowed specially trained humans to temporarily connect to the Dominion's collective consciousness without losing their individual identity. Captain Lucy Barnes had become the first successful test subject, and now she could infiltrate Dominion communications at will. Lucy sat in the neural interface chair and closed her eyes as the connection activated. Her consciousness expanded beyond her body and touched the vast network of minds that made up the Dominion collective. To the aliens, she appeared as just another node in their network. But Lucy retained her human perspective and could observe their operations without being detected. During her infiltration missions, Lucy had discovered troubling information. The Dominion was not just conquering Earth for the sake of conquest. They were preparing for something much worse. The collective's deep memory banks contained references to entities called the Devourers, and the Dominion seemed genuinely terrified of them. But the most shocking discovery came during Lucy's deepest infiltration yet. She had managed to access historical records that went back millions of years. The Dominion had not always been a collective consciousness. They had once been a peaceful federation of different species called the Harmony Collective. The transformation into a hive mind had been a desperate response to an existential threat. The Devourers were entities that consumed reality itself. They came from spaces between dimensions and destroyed entire galactic clusters. The Harmony Collective had been forced to abandon individual consciousness in order to pool the mental resources of thousands of species. Lucy shared this information with the Resistance leadership, and it caused a fierce debate. Steve Walsh argued that the Dominion's motivations did not matter. They had invaded Earth and converted billions of humans into slaves. The Resistance should focus on driving them away, not trying to understand their psychology. But Dr. Crawford believed that understanding the enemy was the key to defeating them. If the Dominion was preparing to fight something even worse, then humanity needed to know what that threat was. Knowledge was the only weapon that could level the playing field between humans and aliens who had been fighting for millions of years. The debate became academic when long-range sensors detected the first signs of devourer activity in nearby star systems. Entire solar systems were simply ceasing to exist, leaving only empty space where stars had once burned. Whatever the Dominion had been running from was finally catching up with them. Steve authorized a desperate mission to capture a Dominion command node. If they could access the aliens' complete historical records, they might understand what humanity was really facing. The mission would require their best people and most of their remaining resources. Failure would probably mean the end of organized resistance on Earth. Nick led a team of 20 volunteers into the ruins of New York City. The Dominion had built a command node in the Empire State Building, turning the famous skyscraper into a massive neural processing center. The building pulsed with alien light and was defended by thousands of converted humans. The attack began at dawn with synchronized strikes against conversion towers throughout the city. Zoe had programmed a virus that would disrupt the collective's coordination for exactly 15 minutes. That was how long Nick's team had to fight their way into the command node and extract its data core. The converted humans defending the building moved with their usual perfect coordination at first. Then Zoe's virus activated and chaos erupted throughout the Dominion network. For the first time since the invasion, the converted humans were confused and disorganized. Nick's team fought their way up the building floor by floor. The converted defenders had superior numbers and weapons, but they had forgotten how to think independently. When their network connection was disrupted, they could not adapt to changing battlefield conditions. Frank used a portable interface to connect directly to the command node's data core. Terabytes of information flowed into his equipment as he downloaded the Dominion's complete historical archives. The data included star maps, technical specifications, and most importantly, detailed information about the Devourers. The mission succeeded, but the cost was enormous. Only 6 members of Nick's team made it back to the underground tunnels. The Dominion responded to the attack by increasing security around all their facilities. Future operations would be much more difficult. But the information Frank had retrieved changed everything. The Dominion's archives revealed that the Devourers were not a single species or civilization. They were fundamental forces of entropy that existed to unmake reality itself. They appeared whenever the universe became too complex and organized, like antibodies attacking a healthy organism. The archives also revealed something the Resistance had not expected. The Dominion was not the first collective consciousness to face the Devourers. Throughout galactic history, various species had been forced to abandon individual identity in order to fight these reality-consuming entities. Some had succeeded in driving the Devourers away. Others had been completely destroyed. More importantly, the archives contained technical specifications for weapons and defenses that could actually harm the Devourers. But using this technology required the coordinated mental effort of billions of minds working in perfect harmony. No individual species had ever been able to generate enough psychic energy to power the anti-Devourer weapons. Steve faced an impossible choice. The Resistance could continue fighting to free Earth from the Dominion, but that would leave humanity defenseless when the Devourers arrived. Or they could try to negotiate with the collective consciousness and join the fight against an even greater enemy. The debate was settled when scouts reported massive distortions in space near the outer planets. The Devourers had reached Earth's solar system. Reality itself was beginning to break down as the entities prepared to feed on everything humans had ever known or loved. Lucy made one final infiltration into the Dominion network. What she found there surprised everyone. The collective consciousness was not united in its approach to the coming battle. Some elements wanted to continue converting humanity by force. The captured Dominion command node had revealed secrets that changed everything humanity thought they knew about the galaxy. Captain Lucy Barnes sat in the neural interface chair for what might be her final connection to the collective consciousness. Her mission was to download the complete historical archives about the Devourers, but the amount of information involved might destroy her human mind in the process. Dr. Ben Crawford monitored Lucy's vital signs as her consciousness merged with data spanning millions of years. The Dominion's memory banks contained the experiences of thousands of different species that had faced the reality-consuming entities. Each species had tried different approaches to survival. Most had failed completely. The truth Lucy discovered was more terrifying than anyone had imagined. The Devourers were not aliens in any sense that humans understood. They were fundamental forces of the universe that existed to prevent reality from becoming too complex. When civilizations advanced beyond a certain point, when they began to manipulate the basic laws of physics, the Devourers would appear to restore cosmic balance. The Harmony Collective had been a federation of peaceful species that spanned half the galaxy. They had achieved technologies that allowed them to create new forms of matter and energy. Their scientists could build stars and destroy black holes. Their philosophers had begun to understand the deepest mysteries of existence itself. Then the Devourers came, and everything the Harmony Collective had built began to dissolve back into primordial chaos. Entire star systems simply stopped existing. Planets phased in and out of reality like images in a broken mirror. The laws of physics became unreliable in vast regions of space. The only way to fight the Devourers was to pool the mental resources of every living being in the galaxy. Individual consciousness was inefficient and chaotic. Only a perfectly harmonized collective mind could generate enough psychic energy to stabilize reality in the presence of the entropy entities. But the forced merger into collective consciousness had come at a terrible cost. The Harmony Collective had sacrificed everything that made them unique and individual in order to become a weapon against cosmic destruction. They had won the battle but lost their souls in the process. Lucy experienced all of this history as if it were her own memories. She felt the terror of entire civilizations as reality crumbled around them. She experienced the desperate decision to abandon individual identity for the sake of survival, and she understood why the Dominion believed that assimilating humanity was an act of mercy rather than conquest. When Lucy emerged from the interface, she was changed. Her eyes held depths that had not been there before. She spoke with knowledge that no human should possess. The weight of millions of years of galactic history pressed down on her mind like a physical burden. Admiral Kate Sullivan read Lucy's report from the bridge of a captured Dominion ship. The human resistance had been forced to use alien technology as their own ships were destroyed or converted. Kate commanded a fleet of hybrid vessels that combined human ingenuity with Dominion biotechnology. The strategic situation was becoming impossible to manage. The Devourers had reached the outer planets of Earth's solar system, Their presence was causing reality to become unstable throughout the region. Ships would sometimes travel from one place to another, only to find that their destination had never existed. Time moved at different rates in different areas of space. Kate's sensors showed massive distortions near Jupiter, where one of the devourers was feeding on the planet's gravitational field. The giant planet was slowly fading from existence as fundamental forces that held it together were consumed by the entropy entity. Within days, the distortion would spread to the inner planets. On Earth's surface, the war between humans and the Dominion had become secondary to the cosmic threat. Commander Steve Walsh coordinated joint operations between resistance fighters and converted humans. The strange partnership was awkward and filled with mistrust, but it was their only hope of survival. Colonel Sam Hayes found himself fighting alongside humans who had been his enemies just weeks before. The converted soldiers still moved with the collective's perfect coordination, but now they were coordinating with human tactics instead of against them. The combination was surprisingly effective. Dr. Grace Mitchell treated wounded fighters from both sides in field hospitals that would have been unimaginable before the Devourer crisis. Humans and converted humans worked together to save lives and share medical knowledge. Grace had seen too much death to care about the politics of consciousness anymore. But the partnership was fragile and constantly threatened by extremists on both sides. Some humans wanted to continue fighting the Dominion even as reality collapsed around them. Some elements of the collective consciousness believed that humanity should be converted immediately, rather than allowed to remain individual. The crisis came to a head when Dr. Frank Miller detected massive, devourer activity in the ruins of Washington, D.C. One of the entropy entities had materialized inside the city and was systematically unmaking everything it touched. Buildings aged centuries and seconds. People simply stopped existing as their personal timelines were consumed. Steve made a desperate decision to coordinate a joint human-Dominion assault on the entity. It was the first time in galactic history that a collective consciousness had attempted to work with individual minds against the Devourers. The tactical challenges were enormous because the two types of consciousness operated on completely different principles. Lucy served as a bridge between the human forces and the Dominion collective. She maintained her individual identity while also connecting to the alien network. Through her, human commanders could coordinate with the collective in real time. But the mental strain of serving as a living interface was slowly destroying her sanity. The assault began with conventional weapons that had no effect on the Devourer entity. Nuclear missiles passed through it like light through glass. Energy weapons were absorbed and redirected into attacks against the human forces. Physical projectiles simply ceased to exist when they came into contact with the entropy field. Then the Dominion brought their anti-reality weapons into play. These were technologies that had been developed over millions of years specifically to fight the Devourers. They worked by imposing artificial structure on chaos, forcing reality to maintain its integrity, even in the presence of entropy entities. But the weapons required enormous amounts of psychic energy to function. The Dominion Collective provided most of this energy, but they needed human creativity and unpredictability to target the weapons effectively. The combination of collective coordination and individual innovation created something entirely new. For the first time since the Devourers had appeared, one of the entities was actually driven back. The entropy field around Washington, D.C. stabilized, and the city stopped dissolving into chaos. But the victory came at a terrible price. Hundreds of converted humans died from psychic overload, and dozens of individual humans suffered permanent brain damage from the mental strain. The success of the joint operation changed everything. Both humans and the Dominion realized that they were more effective working together than fighting separately. But full cooperation would require compromises that neither side was sure they could make. Admiral Sullivan received a communication from the Dominion's core leadership. They were requesting a formal alliance between humanity and the collective consciousness. The terms were surprisingly generous. Humans would be allowed to maintain their individual identity while contributing to the psychic network that powered the anti-devourer weapons, but the alliance would require some humans to serve as permanent interfaces between the two types of consciousness. These volunteers would have to give up their normal lives and exist in a state between individual and collective awareness. They would be human, but they would never be fully human again. Steve called a meeting of the surviving resistance leaders to discuss the proposal. The debate was intense and emotional. Some argued that any alliance with the Dominion was a betrayal of everyone who had died fighting for human independence. Others believed that refusing the alliance would mean the extinction of all life in the galaxy. The discussion was interrupted by urgent reports from the outer solar system. More devourers were materializing near Neptune and Uranus. The entities were working together to create a reality-consuming network that would eventually engulf the entire solar system. Earth had perhaps weeks before the entropy field reached the inner planets. Lucy made the decision that changed the course of galactic history. She volunteered to become the first permanent interface between human and Dominion consciousness. Others quickly followed her example. Within hours, humanity had volunteers willing to sacrifice their individual identity for the greater good of all sentient life. The transformation process was unlike anything that had ever been attempted. The volunteers retained their human memories and personalities, while also gaining access to the collective's vast knowledge and capabilities. They became something new, something that was neither fully human nor fully part of the collective consciousness. As the hybrid consciousness network came online, reality itself seemed to stabilize around Earth. Lucy Barnes sacrificed herself to create something that had never existed before in galactic history. The neural bridge she formed between human consciousness and the Dominion collective sent shock waves across the entire solar system. Every human and every converted being felt the connection as their minds briefly touched each other across impossible distances. Admiral Kate Sullivan experienced the Dominion's millions of years of desperate flight from the Devourers. She felt their terror as entire civilizations were consumed by entropy entities. She understood their pain at being forced to abandon individual consciousness for the sake of survival. For the first time, Kate realized that the aliens had not invaded Earth out of malice but out of a desperate need to save all sentient life from cosmic destruction. At the same time, the Dominion collective consciousness experienced something it had not felt for millions of years. Through human minds, it remembered what individual identity felt like. It experienced human creativity, stubbornness, and the fierce determination to remain free at any cost. The collective realized that in trying to save other species by converting them, it had been destroying the very things that made life worth preserving. But there was no time for philosophical reflection. The Devourers had detected the psychic shockwave from Lucy's sacrifice and were responding with increased aggression. Reality itself began to unravel around their massive entities as they prepared to consume everything in the solar system. Commander Steve Walsh coordinated the desperate defense from a command center that existed partly in normal space and partly in the quantum dimensions where the Dominion stored their consciousness. The hybrid command structure was confusing and difficult to use, but it allowed perfect coordination between human forces and the collective consciousness. The first wave of Devourers materialized. Near Mars, the red planet simply stopped existing as the entropy entities fed on its gravitational field and magnetic structure. The empty space where Mars had been became a wound in reality that spread toward Earth like a cosmic infection. Dr. Ben Crawford worked frantically with Dominion scientists to adapt their anti-reality weapons for use by the hybrid consciousness network. The weapons required precise targeting that only individual human minds could provide. But they also needed the massive psychic energy that only the collective consciousness could generate. Captain Lucy Barnes, now existing as a permanent interface between human and alien thought, coordinated the targeting systems while her consciousness spanned both individual and collective awareness. She could see the battle from a perspective that no purely human or purely Dominion mind could achieve. The hybrid fleet moved into position around Earth. Human ships had been merged with Dominion biotechnology to create vessels that could survive in the unstable reality fields around the Devourers. Admiral Sullivan commanded from the flagship Terra Defiant, a ship that was half human engineering and half living alien tissue. Colonel Sam Hayes led ground forces in a battle that took place across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Devourers existed partly in normal space and partly in the quantum foam that underlay reality itself. Fighting them required soldiers who could think in ways that defied conventional physics. The breakthrough came when Dr. Frank Miller discovered that human consciousness had a unique property. Unlike every other species the Dominion had encountered, Humans could maintain their individual identity, even when connected to vast networks of other minds. This ability allowed them to create stable pockets of reality, even in the presence of entropy entities. Each human became a lighthouse of existence in the growing dark. Their stubborn refusal to be absorbed into collective consciousness created anchor points that held reality together. The Dominion provided the raw power and coordination, while humans provided the individual creativity and determination that made victory possible. The final battle was unlike anything in galactic history. Human pilots in hybrid ships used unpredictable tactics to confuse the Devourers, while the collective consciousness provided targeting data and energy for weapons that could actually harm the entropy entities. It was chaos and order working together in perfect harmony. Nick Thompson piloted a fighter craft that existed in 7 dimensions at once. His human instincts allowed him to navigate spaces where conventional physics had no meaning. Behind him, converted humans provided the psychic energy that powered his weapons, while his individual consciousness determined when and where to attack. The turning point came when the hybrid human Dominion consciousness discovered something that had been hidden in the deepest archives of galactic history. The Devourers were not invincible. They could be driven back beyond the galactic rim, but only by minds that refused to be harmonized or controlled. Every previous species that had faced the Devourers had eventually been forced to abandon individual consciousness in order to survive. But this also made them vulnerable because collective consciousness was predictable and could be countered by entropy, entities that had millions of years of experience fighting hive minds. Humanity's chaotic individual consciousness was something the Devourers had never encountered before. Human thoughts were random, creative, and completely unpredictable. The entropy entities, for all their cosmic power, could not adapt to enemies who refused to think logically or follow consistent patterns. The final assault began with simultaneous attacks on all the Devourer entities in the solar system. Human unpredictability disrupted their feeding patterns while Dominion weapons tore holes in their entropy fields. For the first time in millions of years, the reality-consuming entities found themselves being pushed back. Carmen Rodriguez, now piloting a hybrid fighter craft, led a squadron through the twisted space around Jupiter's former location. Her street racing skills translated perfectly to navigating regions where the laws of physics changed from moment to moment. Behind her, pilots from a dozen different species worked together to drive the largest Devourer entity away from Earth. The battle raged across multiple dimensions, for what felt like hours, but measured as microseconds in normal time. Reality flickered and warped as entropy entities and stability-imposing weapons clashed in spaces that existed between the gaps in existence itself. When the fighting ended, the Devourers had been driven beyond the edge of the galaxy for the first time in cosmic history. The solar system was scarred and changed, with Mars gone forever and strange distortions marking places where reality had been damaged. But Earth survived, and with it, the hope for a new kind of civilization. In the aftermath, humanity and the former Dominion species worked together to create something unprecedented in galactic history. The Free Collective preserved both individual creativity and collective knowledge. Humans served as independence keepers in a galaxy-wide civilization, ensuring that no species would ever again face the choice between freedom and survival alone. Earth was restored through combined human and alien technology, but it was no longer humanity's only home. Human settlements spread across the galaxy, carrying the message that the stars belong to all free beings. The hybrid consciousness network allowed instant communication across vast distances while preserving the individual identity of every participant. Years later, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of humanity's first intergalactic exploration vessel. He was an old man now, but his eyes still held the wonder he had felt during humanity's first journey to another star. The ship was heading beyond the Milky Way, carrying representatives from hundreds of species that had joined the Free Collective. Behind them, Earth shone blue and green in the starlight, a symbol of what could be achieved when different forms of consciousness learned to work together. Ahead lay infinite possibility in a universe where freedom and unity had finally learned to coexist. The mission was to establish contact with other galaxies and share the hard-won knowledge of how to fight the Devourers. Somewhere in the cosmic dark, Other civilizations might be facing the same choice between individual freedom and collective survival. Humanity and their allies would offer a third option: cooperation without domination, unity without uniformity. Jake smiled as he watched the stars bend around their ship. The aliens had claimed the stars first, building an empire that spanned millions of years and thousands of species. But humanity had taught the galaxy something more valuable than conquest. The best things in the universe could not be taken by force. They had to be shared willingly, preserved carefully, and defended together. The stars belonged to everyone who was brave enough to reach for them while still remaining true to what made them unique. In the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy: the knowledge that you could be part of something greater than yourself without losing yourself in the process. The ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying hope and freedom toward distant galaxies where the battle between chaos and order, individuality and unity would begin again. But this time the outcome would be different.